What is happening, Sly Gang? It is Lord Third, your number one trash player, aka the Garbage Goat. And if you are a tabletop role player like myself, it is likely that you have probably been following some of the murmurings that are happening around D&D and Wizards of the Coast's disappointment in the under-monetization of Dungeons & Dragons as an IP. Which, if you are like me, you cringe at even hearing the word monetization when spoken by publishers. In addition to treating the next evolution of D&D like EA and loot boxes, there will likely be a much stricter ecosystem to create content for the world's most mid role-playing game, thanks to the new OGL 1.1. Now don't get me wrong, I've loved D&D since I was a kid. I used to check out the 3rd edition books from the library and just read them cover to cover because I didn't have anyone to play them with. And I have a feeling that most people who play role-playing games, they were first introduced to it through Dungeons & Dragons. I would say the vast majority that seems to be likely, especially at this point. I'm sure that there are some folks who are hearing all of this discourse about the future of D&D and what Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro plan to do with it, and they may be in a party themselves, they may be currently in a campaign, and they're wondering what this might mean for the future of the game that they enjoy or that they like to play. And if that's you and you're wondering how this is going to impact your role-playing experience, well, what if I told you that there is more to a role-playing experience than Dungeons & Dragons? What if some of the things that you like most about D&D are actually done, dare I say it, better in other gaming systems? Well, that's what I wanted to talk about today, as I wanted to give some ideas of some games and systems that you and your party might want to check out as you're trying to escape the dungeon of the dragon that is Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. See what I did there? You see it? Now, I'm going to recommend these games by giving a basic overview of the system and then highlighting 3 major aspects of each game: the playstyle, the accessibility, and the support. So the first game on the list is Mazes, published by 9th Level Games, designed by Chris O'Neill. Mazes actually came out in 2022, and it is a dungeon crawler. It is a dungeon crawler through and through. It was designed from the get-go to harken back to those kind of classic sword and sorcery fantasy games. And because of that, the characters used in Mazes are, as they describe, iconic characters versus dramatic characters. There aren't character arcs, there's not really character progression in the sense that you have this sordid history and you have to sort through it during the course of play, and there's a lot of narrative elements. There's a heavy emphasis on pulp fantasy stories of dungeon delving and felling great evils or threats. Mazes utilizes the polymorph system by 9th Level Games. It is a system that they use in a lot of the games that they publish, in which dice rolls are super simple. The GM or the maze controller in Mazes, they don't roll any dice. So for people who are often inundated by all of the dice that you use in Dungeons & Dragons, this might be a good alternative, because if you like the dungeon crawling aspect, if you like the adventuring aspect and maybe the combat aspect, but you don't like having to sort through all of the dice that you have to use for this ability and that weapon and that weapon, this might be a better alternative to that. The cool thing about Mazes is that you could sit down, make a character, and be in the game faster than doing a one-shot in D&D with player-made characters. Character creation is really simple, and getting into the game is really simple. Because of how new it is, it doesn't have a ton of pages of stuff that people have made on their own. This is kind of going to be the thing that you find oftentimes by like smaller indie published games, is that because they're new games, there's not a ton of content already created for it. Whereas with, new versions of Legend of the Five Rings or Shadowrun, there is general history that is out there that people can adapt to new editions or such. And so a lot of these smaller games, you're not really going to find that level of support. But you can go to 9th Level Games' website, and they have all of the resources that you need to get started. If you want to pick up the physical copy of Mazes, it is $39.99 on the website, but you can also buy the digital version for $19.99 and save yourself some money there. Along with those resources, there are a number of other resources such as character sheets and things like that that you can get for free from the 9th Level Games website. Second on our list is Ryutama. Ryutama is a Japanese tabletop role-playing game that is published by Kodadama Heavy Industries and created by Atsuhiro Okada. The game was actually created in 2007, but it was reprinted and retranslated in 2015 in English for the first time by an intrepid group of players who really enjoyed the game. So Ryutama is a tabletop JRPG with a Studio Ghibli aesthetic. I really love the art in this book. It certainly evokes that feel of being in a Hayao Miyazaki movie. It is distinct in that the GM or the Ryujin has a character and a sheet that they make too, along with the characters. And speaking of character creation, the characters that you create in Ryutama, you give them essentially jobs more so than classes. And jobs are not geared toward combat, they're geared toward an overall function. So some are better at combat. There is combat in this game. The jobs that you can assign people, things like farmers, merchants, soldiers, those types of things. I think that hints to the overall gameplay in that there is combat and there are distinct rules to combat, and it actually borrows very much from kind of turn-based JRPGs in that you have like a back row and a front row and you decide where you are, and you can create different objects and obstacles in the battlefield that is kind of like this finite size. But it's much more family friendly, I would say, than some of the other games that are not only on this list, but a lot of, RPGs out there. I would say that if you have this desire to play a character that is a little bit more, morally ambiguous or dubious.
Perfect.
Yes, excellent.
Everyone is basically a JRPG character in this, really trying to be good guys. So, if you enjoy kind of playing the more dastardly character or the morally gray character, this is not the one for you. In terms of the accessibility, it is pretty simple. You use a lot of the typical kind of 7 dice set. I don't believe that you use D20s, if I recall correctly, but you use kind of everything from the 4 all the way up to the 12. People that are used to D&D, they'll probably be used to this. Checks are done a little bit differently, but in terms of support, you can find digital character sheets and other things in the game that you need online. I believe that you can purchase digital copies of the booklet on the webpage. You can also get the physical copy ordered. Next up, I have the Fate Core system. And the major thing about Fate Core is that it is all about telling stories. From the very design of the game, it throws out having a bunch of dice that you have to roll, or having to count up how many dice you have to roll, and all these different things. And it uses fudge system where you roll 4d6s with positive, negative, and blank faces. And if you have positives, it increases the likelihood of your success. If you have negatives, it decreases the likelihood of your success. Blank faces are nothing. They're basically 0, so they add nothing to your roll. And then you add that with your skill. And then there's a ladder of negatives to 8. And the higher you are on that ladder, the better you're doing on whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so Fate Core in and of itself is much more about the story. It is about getting the mechanics out of the way so that the table can tell the story. And I think that's a really cool thing. And I think the character creation is a lot more interesting in Fate as well, because you have different aspects that you give to your character. And it's cool because the GM can compel different things from your character. And so compelling different aspects of your characters allows the story to progress. And it's really cool because it challenges you as players and as a table and as a party to really lean into the narrative elements of the story. Fate is a setting agnostic system. A lot of games you will see they have the
powered by fate
emblem on their book or on their game. In Fate, you can be space pirates, you can be fantastic wizards, and they really market the system to be that way. One such game that is powered by Fate is Magonomia. Magonomia is a role-playing game of Renaissance wizardry. It takes place in an enchanted England of 1500 to 1600. And in this, magic is much more grounded than I would say in D&D. It's fantasy, but it is much more grounded fantasy. So instead of thinking of like a wizard being someone who flings fireballs and lightning bolts, think more of an alchemist who can transmute the properties of things, or a witch who is more of like a doctor and who can mix herbs and things to create potions and things like that. Definitely this level of, like someone can commune with spirits or something like that, but you're not doing things like summoning a meteor to fall on top of a city or something like that. I wouldn't say that it's low magic, but it's much more grounded magic. And the magic in this game system is much more of a science than it is this wildly ethereal, overarching, force. I should note that a pretty cute person that I know, that I may be married to, also writes for the Shoestone Publishing, who publishes Maganomia, and maybe has written an adventure that is coming out soon. But the art is really cool in the book. There are these really interesting mix of painting and kind of like these ink etching that you would see from the period. It's not the type of system where you're fully fleshing out this world, because it is kind of like this alternate history. If you're looking for something a little bit more grounded, definitely check it out. And if nothing else, also check out Fate Core. I mean, I think, like I said, Fate can fit any setting, by design. It is designed to really fit any setting. Next up, I have the Root role-playing game, published by Magpie Games. If you are familiar with Root, the game of woodland strategy, this is the game of woodland adventure. So it takes place in the same world as the Root strategy game. It takes place in that same world. You take control of a vagabond. If you've played Root, you are probably familiar with one of the factions just being a vagabond who can kind of do things to ally themselves with one faction or another, and you kind of have to tread this fine line between the two. And maybe you want someone else to be successful in one place and you want someone else to fail, and so you kind of have to build this tension. And that is what you do, just in a highly narrative element in the Root role-playing game. If you are unfamiliar with Root, it is very similar in aesthetic to the Redwall series of books by Brian Jacques. If you're a fan of playing with political intrigue and personal agendas in a highly stylized woodland creature environment, this is the one to play. This is the game to play. Something that is a little bit more whimsical, but it can be serious. There's like some level of like seriousness to it, because there are games with like very heavy political intrigue, but that political intrigue has greater weight, such as Legend of the Five Rings. This is a lot more lighthearted. It is a lot easier to jump into Root than it would be to jump into Legend of the Five Rings. Like Legend of the Five Rings, you have to answer like 20 questions when you're creating your character, versus with Root, you figure out what animal you are, maybe what some of your history is and what your skills are, and you kind of put those things together. So it's a little bit easier. It uses a system that is very similar to the Power by Apocalypse. It's a 2d6, and it's on a scale of 2 to 12. Like 12 being a greater, like a great success or legendary success, and a 2 being like an abject failure. And you just have the scale of how you succeed in doing things, which I like. It really simplifies the gameplay. There's a lot more narratively driven because of that. I will say that you're not battling, there are no monsters, right? You're not going to be fighting a dragon. Your opponents are just very real. They're other creatures just like you. Like, because of that, you're not dungeon delving. You're not really battling monsters. There is combat and there's conflict, but it is not to the same level of, say, some of the other games that we've already talked about. So if you're really into dungeon delving, I would not pick this one up. If you want to fight these weird, fantastical creatures like unicorns and nightmares and goblins and trolls, this is not the one for you. But if you like the aesthetic and you like the aspect of playing between and manipulating the relations between these different factions, this is definitely one that I would suggest. There's a lot of support for Root online, not just the role-playing game, but also for the board game. Yeah, so I would say check it out. Magpie always does a great job of having the resources available. You can get character sheets, you can get faction sheets, all of that stuff you can just download from the website. Last, but certainly not least, speaking of woodland creatures, I want to highlight Wander Home. So, Wander Home is a pastoral fantasy game about going on a journey. Unlike many of the games that I've highlighted in this video so far, Wander Home is a lot less traditional in terms of role-playing games. There is no real combat, right? It is really all narrative. And it is about going on journeys, and it's about having conversations. And it is very much, whereas Root was much more of like that red wall type of, fantasy and experience. This is much more like Animal Crossing. And I think one of the cool things that that you find in Wander Home is that creatures that you can be snakes and donkeys and llamas, any manner of creature, but none of those creatures have this assumed identity behind them, right? Whereas in Root, if you're a cat, you probably ally yourself with Marquise the cat. But in Wander Home, a snake is a snake, and there's no prejudice against snakes that they're these conniving and plotting creatures. There's no preconceived idea. There are no factions that are out, to get folks. It is about the journey. And what you do in Wander Home is you establish where you're coming from, where you're going to, and what is home for you. And those are all a part of your character. So it's a level of adventure. It's a level of exploration. I would definitely recommend Wander Home if you are looking for something that is not where the stakes are not as high. But if you're really looking for something that is a lot more laid back, that is a lot more friendly. I would even suggest Wander Home be something that you play a journey between like really heavy sessions of another RPG that you're playing. Wander Home is the type of thing that can be a really good catharsis, and it's just a really good feel-good game. Wander Home is actually the only game on this list that doesn't use dice of any kind. You really just need something to mark as tokens, and then you in turn use those tokens to provide solutions or to ease someone's pain. There's a list of it in the book. I wouldn't pick up Wander Home if you're looking for like the traditional fighting monsters and aesthetic from RPGs, but if you want something that is a lot more laid back, that's a lot more chill, and that is a lot more friendly, definitely pick it up. And you can actually check out the Possum Creek Games website and get all of the resources that you need there. There are a lot of RPG systems out there. One of the things that I mentioned, as I said before, is that you may have been playing D&D for years, and this is maybe the first time that you've thought about playing a different game. There are a lot of game systems out there. There are other editions of D&D that get some things better than the 5th edition, the current edition of D&D. Like maybe you want to explore those. But I highly encourage people, try something new. Look at something different. Give it a shot. And I think that's kind of the amazing thing about this moment that we live in gaming, is that so many people are able to take these ideas of fun things that you can do, and they are able to get them out there, and we get to enjoy the benefits of it with the people that we care about and the friends that we enjoy playing with. And if you've ever been in a situation where you're like, I've always wanted to do this like weird space opera RPG. Maybe there's a space opera RPG already out there just waiting for you and your friends to play it. I highly encourage you to explore what other types of role-playing games are out there. I love role-playing games, and more so I love introducing people to role-playing game. If there are games that you're thinking of exploring that you want to check out, list them down in the comments. If there are questions that you have about any of the games that I mentioned, list them in the comments, and maybe have some other folks answer that's watching this video. If you found this at all helpful, if this was something that you liked, or if you would like to see more of this, this is I love giving suggestions of different things. I love playing devil's advocate and saying maybe you should try this thing instead of this mainstream thing that everyone is doing. Drop a like, let me know that this was helpful or that you enjoyed this. I promise I'm in the process of working on a couple of Blinded by Nostalgia videos, as well as a couple of thoughts on some things that are happening in the gaming industry right now. So stay tuned for those. Subscribe if you want to see those videos or seeing more content like this, gaming related content. And hopefully I will see you again very soon. Be kind to one another and stay excellent.
Mission accomplished.